Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. I'm Yehuda Shamroth. And if you can guess what city I'm in right now, you get a free safer from Rabbi Winston of your choice. He's the BP restaurant, just to give you a hint. I'm on the highway. Okay, so Rabbi Winston is going to be speaking tonight about the mixed multitudes, part two, or the Erev Rav, as some people know them by, and the people who straggled along from Mitzrayim when the Jews were making their big exodus. So without further ado, just make sure you check Rabbi Winston's website, 36.org, as you see under his name, and buy one of his many amazing books or tap into his Parsha sheets, go to his webinars. And Rabbi, take over from here, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to make it clear before I start that just because I'm giving this class at night does not make me Erev Rav. But especially, hopefully, when we see the criterion that the Zohar brings down, with the help of the mashiach Dvash, who explains it, that he isolates 5 categories. Just to review quickly, just from last week, to understand the basis of this discussion, that the Erev Rav, which we officially see for the first time in this week's Parsha, at the end of the Parsha, when the Jewish people finally go out, and the Torah says after 430 years, the Jewish people left, and the Erev Rav left with them. Moshe took them. And the Medrash explains that they really weren't supposed to go. And Hashem even told Moshe Rabbeinu it's not a good idea. And Moshe Rabbeinu insisted on taking them with them. And they went. And as a result of that, of course, history has been a disaster, beginning with the golden calf at Mount Sinai. And after that, everything just goes downhill. And here we are, over 3,300 some odd years in exile, countless pogroms and crusades, and and the Holocaust, of course, and all the personal suffering in between, and just a very, really rough 3 millennia of history, because Moshe Rabbeinu took the Erev Rav out. Because of the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, which we explained last week, according to the Rizal, were actually sincere converts. Moshe converted himself. If you can convince Moshe Rabbeinu, then you have to be pretty sincere. And it seems that they were on their own already gravitating towards the Jewish people long before it even became evident that the Jewish people were going to go out and be free, because the exile hadn't even begun. They go back to Yaakov Avinu's time, and then we discussed last week, based upon Kabbalah, how the souls of the Erev Rav were really from going back to Adam Arishon, going back to Adam and Chava, specifically Adam Rishon. The Gemara says in Eruvin that they were the direct result of us 130 years of tshuva. And why 130 years? Repentance, because this is more complicated. I'm just going to say it, and then you can look it up, and you can try to understand it later on, or write me if you want to. But basically, everything, the whole world, just like, for example, the physical world, this is a little bit of a side, but it's interesting anyhow. Everything in this world, we know, is molecules. It's all molecules, atoms, electrons, all these different things, positive forces, or what we call strong forces and weak forces, and gravity, it's all, but what we see is just a wall, a table, and pictures and food and different things. But if you go down to a microscopic level, or even beyond that, you get even smaller and smaller and smaller. It turns out that nothing's really attached. As solid as this table is, right? As solid as this table is, it's not really so solid. Really, it's just electrons. They are attracted to one another, making a bond, and then you cut something. It's not really cutting it, but you're really just pushing electrons apart from each other. It's all wonderful, science and physics and things like that. But the basic components, the chemical, the what do you call it, the atomic table, right? That shows you the different atoms in the world, that the different combinations produce different things. That's reality, whether you can see it or not, whether you know it or not. And scientists take advantage of this. Doctors, medicine takes advantage of this. Genetics and pharmaceutical products and things like that. It's all based upon understanding how all this works and interacts with one another. But for the average person, it's just you go on with life, you eat food, and you do your thing. And the same thing is true on a Kabbalistic level too, that everything in the world is made up of Yud-Kei Vav-Keis, which is Hashem's name, the Tetragrammaton name, which we don't say the way it's actually written, at least at the stage of history, the time of the temple, on Yom Kippur. You see how serious a thing in the Musaf, it mentions how everyone fell on their faces when the Kohen Gadol would recite the Shema Meforish, which is what this name is, and pronounced it the way. I'm laughing because the one group of Christians that decide to use the name itself, fortunately, they pronounce a Yud as a J, and didn't get it right, because it would have been a problem halachically. But it's too holy. It's too holy. It's we have other names, and so in the Sidurim you'll see it printed often without the vowels, and we instead say a lower name that is less holy that we can pronounce today. But the whole world, the whole makeup, the atoms, which are microscopic, or on atomic level and make up everything, but it's Yud Kei Vav Kei that make them up. Quarks are not the smallest element. This, talk about small, but everything in the physical world originates yesh ma'ayin, from the spiritual world. Something from nothing, but it's not nothing like nothing. It's like we don't exactly know what that is, but it's nothing compared to the something, meaning that the spiritual world, because the spiritual is like it's not it's like nothing compared to the physical world, which is why so many people can believe in the physical world, not believe in the soul, the spiritual world, because they can't see it. It's like not there as far as they're concerned. It's more of an emunah, and there's evidence of it clearly, but it's all Yud Kei Vav Kei. So if a person is doing a mitzvah, learning Torah, doing the right things, so then they basically they fix Yud Kei Vav Keis in the world. And if a person, God forbid, blemishes a Yud Kei Vav Kei by Nevera, so it's damaged and has to be repaired. And Adam, again, this is in the Arizal. If you want to look it up, Sharp Psukim, he talks about this. You can see it in more detail and others for him as well. But it's a class into itself, and maybe at some point then we'll do that, God willing. But that he damaged five Yud Kei Vav Keis, 5 Gevuras. Every sphere is 10 spheres, 10 subparts. 5 of them are on the side of Chasadim, Chesed. 5 on the side of Gevura. Gevura is the source of judgment, and eventually the source of evil. Yitzchak Avinu was Gevura. Esav was also from Gevura. These are all important ideas, but the net effect of Adam's eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra and going against the will of God was he damaged 5 Yud Kei Vav Keis. Now Yud Kei Vav Kei is Yud with the Hey, then the Vav and the Hey, right? And if you add up all the letters in the gematria, it's equal to 26. So if you damage 5 of the 526s, that's 130. Not 1:30 in the afternoon, but 130 the gematria of Yud Kei Vav Kei. And he knew this. I guess God told him, or Adam knew himself, because he saw the effect of his sin on creation, because at one point in time he was the greatest Kabbalist to have ever lived. He knew things that we will never know, at least not until a future time. And somehow he's aware of it, the damage he did. So therefore he fasted, and he did certain things for 130 years to try to rectify those Yud Kei Vav Keis. He never, of course, fully rectified what he did, because otherwise we'd all be in the Garden of Eden and we wouldn't be having the shir tonight, at least not here. But he did enough of a tikkun, but the net result, and this is the point that we were getting at last week, the net result was that just like when you make soap in a factory, there's a byproduct that pollutes the rivers and pollutes the air, whatever, smoke. You have to create heat. Right, in order to make things, heat makes smoke and things like you have to deal with all the pollution. That's why some people believe in global warming, because we have pollution. The pollution is not just because we sit there all day long making pollution, but in trying to make life better, a net effect is a negative product called pollution. And so it's the same thing. He was having a positive impact on himself and history by doing the tshuva, but there was a pollution that resulted, and that was the damaged souls that originated from the same level as Moshe himself in the spheres, way up there, way up there. So they're very holy souls, but because they came out in such a negative way, they were blemished in the process. And just like they say, there's nothing worse than a reformed sinner. I think the corollary of that is nothing worse than a reformed tzaddik, meaning someone who was once righteous and then goes the other way. They become even harsher against religion than someone who wasn't born that way at all. And these souls, because they were so holy and got so damaged, They had to be rectified. And the amazing thing is, when you learn Kabbalah, you learn all kinds of things that you wonder, like, how do we not know this before? How is this not taught? Even though it's true, it's Kabbalah, 100%. But nonetheless, it's so important. If someone says to you that drinking a certain amount of water per day is important to survive, to live, and if you don't, you could dehydrate and maybe even die. It turns out that's a Kabbalistic idea. Somehow that should be filtered down into everyday life because it's such an important concept. It's just a nice idea, or even just a deep insight, but you can live without it. Okay, so that's for someone who wants to become more mystical, go deeper into Torah exploration, understanding, and learning. But if it's something that's so central to what's going on in history, like this is the thread. This whole Erev Rav thread is what began back at the beginning of history, and it's been running through history the entire time, and history won't come to a conclusion until it's been dealt with and concluded and fixed up. So how do we not know about this? I mean, the Erev Rav was just a couple of words mentioned over here, and then by the golden calf and the bad news, and we want to get rid of them as much as possible, as fast as possible. And we mentioned last week the Vilna Gaon talks about how the final war for the Jewish people is against the Erev Rav, and their main thing is to really destroy the Jewish people ultimately. And but it seems like and by the way, it's like the Arabs, for example. The Arabs, they're not the main point of Jewish history. They're a major part of Jewish history, but not the main point. And it's true. There's so many, haters. I just saw about some protests, some gatherings in New York and in train stations by Palestinians calling for the death of Israel, wiping us out. And there's like, don't fool yourself. In university professors who support this and strongly against Israel and the Jewish people, above and beyond what might be for political purposes. This is anti-Semitism, whether they realize it or not. And maybe at Parshas Yisro, we'll discuss this in more detail, because one of the questions that people ask is how do you turn Germans into mass murderers? How do you do that? How do people could be mass murderers and do genocide against their people? Because you need to know. Because you need to be able to recognize it. How do you know that the guy next to you, the 100,000 German Jews chose to remain in Germany because they gambled and they banked on the idea that the Germans living next door and down the street could never really do that kind of serious harm to them. And they were shocked, of course, more than shocked, to find out otherwise. What changes it? What's the basis of all this? But still, it's kind of on the side. It's bugging us. It comes after us, and it has a major role in perfecting the Jewish people, but not as central as the Erev Rav. And the Erev Rav, I believe we mentioned, they came back first as the generation of the flood. They got wiped away, came back as a generation of the dispersion. They got dispersed, eventually died off. Eventually came back in Egypt, and the ones that were rectified and fixed up came back during the slavery as Jews. And the Rizal explains how that's why the babies were drowned in the Nile River. It just sounds like that's what Paro's doing. I mean, how did he get the Egyptians to go along with it? I have no idea how the Egyptians were prepared to follow Pharaoh that far to get at the Jews, to throw their own kids in the Nile River just in case. Okay, these are question marks in history, but the Jewish children had to be, because it's all part of the Tikkun process for the Dor Mavel, for the generation of the flood. And the building of Pithom and Ramesses with the bricks and all the straw and all that has to do with Migdal Bavel, fixing up the sin of the Tower of Bavel. So everything is so connected and intertwined, and it's like this is what's going on all around us. It's just a little hard today in modern day society to see how that's still true. Back then, it's biblical. The Chumash speaks about it. We were told about it. We have traditions about it. But today, we don't have prophets. Right? At least not the kind you can't put in the bank, right? But we don't have direction to understand, but nonetheless, we have to assume it's the same thread all the way through. And as the Rizal points out in Shar HaGilgulim, he says that the Dor Basra, the final generation of the Jewish people in the world, is going to be the Dor Midbar coming back, the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu that left with him into the desert and traveled in the desert with him. They're going to come back as Gilgulim. They're going to reincarnate into the bodies of people living today and over the last little while. And the Erev Rav comes back too. They're also going to come back. So even if there's no direct father to son tradition of Erev Rav, doesn't make a difference. It's the soul that counts, and God just takes those souls and puts them back in, and you have it. You have the Erev Rav. So it's a long, convoluted, but very important history that we need to understand what's being rectified and fixed up. But I'd say that one of the main things, today is making sure you don't fall into the category of Erev Rav, because that's a lot easier to do probably than ever before. Because of all the pressures of modern day society, religion has taken a beating over the last 100 some odd years, because science has demystified so much of what was once the basis of so much religion, not Judaism, but Christianity and other religions, that the forces are being explained in physics, physics terms, and as a result of that, science has gained a lot of traction over the last 100 years, and often at the cost of religious belief. Judaism was never based upon that. Judaism is based upon a Masorah. It's based on traditions. It's based upon an experience at Mount Sinai coming up, Parshas Yisro, B'ezras Hashem, and that tradition being passed down from generation to generation. The fact that there were people who did miracles is a nice added bonus. The fact that we have prophecy was a bonus, right? But the main thing is that I have a tradition going back all the way back to Mount Sinai. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. There's no religion that could first of all command you in 613 mitzvahs and survive unless it was true. That's why no other religion does that. They can't. You try selling that to somebody. A couple of people, maybe, fanatics, people into we call it masochists, perhaps, but thousands, if not millions of people are not going to buy into it. It's not to do things that are against their nature, unless they understand this actually came from God, or they witnessed it the first time and then passed that down. But the thread today really is very camouflaged in all the events of history, and that's why it's important to understand who the Erev Rav can be. And I think just by trying not to be one, to fall in that category, then you, in a sense, do battle against the Erev Rav. If you can strengthen the world of Torah, if you can strengthen tradition, and you can fortify it, then that for sure is battling against the Erev Rav, and the rest will take care of itself. So the Zohar in Parshas Bereshis on Chof Hey Amud Aleph begins the discussion. A few places Erev Rav comes up in the Zohar, of course, but here's one of the primary places back at the beginning, Parshas Bereshis, because as we mentioned, it's tied back to Adam Rishon and his tshuva. I just want to one more thing that's important to point out before starting. As we said, if only Moshe Rabbeinu had just listened to God and not taken the Erev Rav out. Whole different history. If only the spies had not gone out and spied the land and come back with a negative report, 10 of them, right? If only, then everything would have been different. But one thing we have to understand and appreciate, and the Medrash, Koheles Rabbah says this, and the Medrash Tanchuma talks about this, and this, you don't even go to Kabbalah to understand this, but Kabbalah does explain more deeply why this is the case. It's all nigzar, all of history. Even when it looks like we're going really backwards, we're always going forwards. Listen, we're talking about God over here. God doesn't make mistakes. God's not fooled. God doesn't discover things for the first time and say, "Oops, I wish I'd done that differently." We have no present, because the future is constantly becoming the past. We can't stop time. So every single second, the future becomes the past. The future becomes the past. So somehow we have a sense of presence, a present, presence too, but present, enough that we can function. But if you try, you can't stop time. So therefore, the present is more of a fictitious reality. It's just a threshold that the future becomes by passing over it to become the past. But by God, it's the exact opposite. There's no future, there's no past. There's only the present, because they're all the same thing. He's above time, right? And because he's above time, everything that ever is going to be already has been and is at the same time, at least as far as we're concerned. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why attaching yourself to God gives you a greater sense of eternity. Shabbos is called 1/60th of the world to come. The basis of that connection to the world to come, that sense of eternity, that sense of timelessness for 26 hours, is because God makes himself more available. And if you attach yourself to God and you don't understand how to do that, you by definition become embedded in the real present, which is him. And that's why he's called Yud Ke Vav Ke, because Yud Ke Vav Ke was Haya Hov V'Hiyeh. It's all one thing at the same time. So because of that, and he's omniscient and omnipotent, and he's just above everything. That basically everything that happens had to have happened. It was meant to happen. So where does free will come into it? Well, there's a couple answers to that question. We certainly have free will. The Torah certainly says we do, and even the Kabbalists for sure say so. Yeah, because the most basic answer is it doesn't say, though, who has to do what. Pinchas came along and developed himself into the kind of person that when God needed a zealot, he was ready. But anyone could have been that zealot if they had developed themselves properly. Likewise, Haman was Mumuchan, as the Gemara says. Muchan, the poor, he was somebody who, the way he was going in life, his attitude, his approach to life, and his nature too, made him fitting to become Haman, the story in the Megillah, because that's what history required, and God planned. That's what the Medrash says. There had to be a Mordechai, there had to be a Haman, there had to be a Noach, there had to be a flood. All these things had to be. It's why? Because history is about the actualization of potential. In Hebrew, it's called mikoich lepoil, actualizing potential. Koich, koich, you mean strength, right? But koich in this sense means like potential. It's a possibility, it's an ability that has yet to be realized. And poil is like you actualize it. And that's what it's all that's been going on the entire time, even before creation. We go back to the breaking of the vessels. That's all that's going on. Light's being realized. God made Maaseh Bereshis, he made creation, and a certain amount of lights were actualized to make Gan Eden and make the world. And then Adam reversed some of that, de-actualized some of that potential, put it back in. He gave it back to the side of impurity, and the rest of 6,000 years of history have been about re-actualizing that and actualizing whatever has been left over. When the last potential has been actualized as God wants it, as far as he's concerned, Mashiach comes. But it's not like Mashiach it's like Mashiach is going to come because that's when it's supposed to happen, because that's when it's going to happen. There's two possible dates for Mashiach. Achishena B'ita, and the Lashon says really the same thing in the end, because B'ita, the last possible moment, will be a little bit early. But there's a reason why. There's a reason why Mashiach hasn't come early yet, and there's a reason why we don't do necessarily what might have brought. There's famous stories of rebbes, people giving shurim and talking to their chassidim, where all of a sudden they stop and they pause and they say, "Rebbe, what's the matter? What's the matter?" He said, "Oh, Mashiach could have come at that moment and we just weren't ready." So the whole two, another moment come and go. Oh, why did you tell us earlier? Why did we know it? Well, I didn't know. I just happened. It was like, well, you saw Mashiach and he came and he went. No. When Mashiach comes, because that's when he was meant to come from the very beginning. Well, so what about the snake? And what about Adam's choice? When the Medrash says that Adam comes to God and says to him, and says, I'm looking at the Torah, and it always talks about death. I haven't eaten yet from the Eitz Hadas Tova, with the tree of knowledge of good. I haven't done the sin yet, and you're already talking about death. Clearly, death is meant to come into the world, and I'm just the guy to bring it about. Okay. So you'll find, we have expressions like adversity builds, no pain, no gain. All these ideas, because we see that's the way life works. You can cheat, and you can get by. You can not do the work. You can fake your way through college and get a degree, but you will not be a better person, because if your whole goal is just to become rich, just to become successful, which is not what life is about. And you can do that, but everybody knows that anybody who pursues life like that, to have more control, to have more, they don't see it in terms of developing themselves as a human being. They only see it as a way to rise to the top and have power and have wealth and have luxury. And everybody knows that person as a human being lacks tremendously. And even though we might be jealous, we might, that's natural. I wish I had his money, but we also know that the quality of life is where it's at. And yisurim, suffering, difficulty, doesn't have to be bad suffering. It could be positive suffering, like exercise, for example, where you choose to do it. You choose to go out there and run harder and make your lungs work and your heart work, because you like and it might even make you get endorphins in your body. So someone said it, that runner's high or endorphin is your body's way of saying, this is causing me a lot of pain. I'm gonna drug us now. It's like this is coping with the pain in the end. And this is all part of life that sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, we try to avoid, but we know it's life. And there's a reason why. Because every time we would sit with the body that we have and the Yetzer Hara that we have since Adam ate the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we are basically, for all intents and purposes, couch potatoes. That's now some more than others. We have to be motivated. Right, so someone, for example, who is wants to lose a little bit of weight, will exercise. It's forcing them to. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. If they didn't do it, then they or if someone who needs to stay up late, maybe takes a nap early in the day because that's part of the preparation. But we see how the situations that happen to us, not that we create necessarily, and we have almost no choice in them, who the family we're born into, the brothers and sisters that we have, the school that we go to, the education and the friends we make, and all these, so many things are just thrust upon us, and we're forced to deal with it. And in dealing with it, we access potential within ourselves that we otherwise would ignore and maybe never even know it exists. And the stories that came out of the Holocaust are absolutely remarkable. The levels, even in the worst and the most greatest nightmare situations, the chasadim and the concern and how far people went to keep Pesach, to make a Seder at the cost of the risk of life, and to somehow come across some form of matzah that's like impossible, to get a shofar smuggled into the camps to blow. And it's like unbelievable stories. These are potentials that we don't have, thank God, we don't have to, go out of our way to do, because basically, the gabbai has got a shofar in the bima, and he takes it out and he blows it on Rosh Hashanah. Your job is just pay attention. Just make sure you had shul on the right time and you pay attention to what's going on. Easy, right? It's very easy. Baruch Hashem. And we shouldn't take that for granted. On the contrary, to avoid having to get to the real extreme situations, which happen from time to time, you take the full pleasure in how easy God makes it, and make it difficult for yourself by being moser nefesh. It says that the reason why the 10 martyrs had to die at the hands of the Romans, crazy story, right there in the Musaf, on Tisha B'Av, ridiculous, weird story. We just read it and take it, after all these years, seen it once, seen it 1,000 times, but crazy story. So what had happened? So Kabbalah explains, because the process of elevating sparks at that stage of history had so slowed down and broken down, because Jews weren't doing mitzvahs, or if they were doing them, they weren't doing them with enough intention. And that intention is what sends the sparks up. The mitzvahs get the sparks going, but it's your kavanah. When you pray, saying the words is a big deal, but it's a much bigger deal to say the words with the proper intention and with your heart. Because if you're not moser nefesh, if you're not like self-sacrificing with your energy, then God forbid we're forced to be self-sacrificing with our bodies. Not as punishment, because the process demands it. And life is just about this. From the moment you wake up in the morning until the time you go to bed at nighttime, you're just accessing potential and realizing it. So the more you do it, of course, the greater person you become, the more you accomplish in life. We're capable of so much more than we do, that's for sure. But, it's one of the ways also to access Siyata Shemaya, heavenly help, and the miracles that come along with all of that as well. So that's just a very long way to say that we needed the air of Rav. The reason why Moshe Rabbeinu took them out was because God wanted them to go. He said he didn't because history required it to appear as if he didn't. So it looks like it's a mistake and all that because that's all part of the process. But B'Ikron, in essence, it was declared from the beginning, just like Adam's sin was meant to happen at some point in time. Because this is the way lights are being actualized. Potential is being actualized. Doesn't mean you sit down and say, "Oh, well, that's the case. And why am I so upset about what's going on in the Knesset or the, in the, this place of politics and that place of politics and my shul?" It's like, what do I care? Everything's happening anyhow. It's all decreed from before creation. Yeah, that's true. But your reaction to it is what God's looking for. And as Reb Burkutz once told us when I was back my old days in yeshiva, he says that there's two types of mitzvahs: ben adam l'makom and ben adam l'chavero. You have mitzvahs that are between you and God, personally, and mitzvahs that include your fellow man, like love your neighbors yourself, as a mitzvah between ben adam l'chavero. And he says in the world of mitzvahs ben adam l'makom, between you and God, right, like believing that God is one, He took us to Mitzrayim, and don't swear falsely, like these type of mitzvahs. You have to, of course, live with the reality that God is everything. There's nothing else but Him. Nothing happens without Him. But when it comes to Mrs. Ben Chavero, you have to act as if there is no God. Take responsibility. If you're a doctor, you have to operate. You have to take care of your patients. Even though you know that this patient can only be cured and survive and live if God says so. You can't save their life. That's what Jesus is with brothers. You 10 brothers try to kill one, they couldn't do it. So how can one kill 10? If God says no. God says yes, and who can stop him? Yeah. But nevertheless, we're here for whatever reason to exercise our free will to get to the world to come, and we push. Having a discussion like this, we can talk about it. But in everyday life and living it out, you have to actualize potential. You have to make free will choices to take advantage of the situation that you find yourself in, whatever it's going to be, whenever it happens to be, right? Even the things that you do in a way that you shouldn't, even if you took a risk, a spiritual risk that you shouldn't have, it's also divine providence in the end. It might cost you, right? But you have to decide how to deal with the situation. If it just means praying to God and asking for help. So the Erev Rav is an integral part of Jewish history and world history, for that matter, because that's what creation requires. Having said that, take a look at the categories of Erev Rav. So the Zohar says, it says that there are basically Chamesh meaning Inun Erev Rav. There are 5 categories of Erev Rav. They're called Klipas, which are like that phrase for negative spirituality in the world. And he says, the Zohar says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? The Inun Siman Negera. And if you want to remember them, there's an acronym that is made up of the first letter of the 5 categories, and we'll see what they are in a second. And the actual siman, the sign, so to speak, that to remember them is called negera, which literally means like a bad plague. Guess what they are? Terrible plague, right? Nega is like a plague, and ra is bad, evil, right? But it stands for, it says nephilim, and we'll see what that means. Giborim. Nephilim means fallen ones. Gibori means strong ones. Anaki means giants. Rephaim was a category of angels too, right? People. Amalekim, and of course Amalek. These are the 5 categories of Erev Rav. Now you'll say, but aren't the Nephilim? Weren't those the angels at the end of Parshas Bereshis that asked God to go down, and they fell and got trapped, back amongst mankind, became bad people, bad angels, whatever, bad, right? But today, we're in the feeling today. There's no such angels today, say, right? Gibur also. There's a lot of people, not the Gibur of yesterday at the time of Tanakh, and Anakim also, the giants. Got to tell people, like lots of basketball players, but not giants per se, right? Rephaim also, down here, Amalekim, okay, there's no pure blood Amaleki today. But as we said, it's not so much the physical tradition, that can be a major thing, but it has to do with the soul, and the souls come back, right? And it says, we start to define the categories. The first category he deals with is Amalek. And he says over here, I'm going to really skip to the end because there's a lot of text to go through. If we had a couple hours, we'd go through all of it. He goes in the background, and well, but in the end, he says, today, what does it mean? He says, Haim Elu Harashim Hamismamnin Al Tzibor. These are the leaders, the heads that are appointed over the communities. Okay, and they're not nice. They're like, they use their power to manipulate and to be harsh on the community, on the Jewish community, right? And they really make a point of hanging on to their power and using it to, as they see fit. They use extortion, things like that. They have instruments of really war, but they find ways to get their money, the Jewish people's money. They're rich, but they're constantly calling people to other people who are not so rich. My money from the category of what happened recently in Israel when certain people who were very anti-Haredi found ways to increase the taxes on people who really can't afford to pay their bill as well. To try to lessen their financial situation. On the category, not saying that does necessarily, but so they can't. And that's what he says. Okay, because these Jewish leaders, their souls are rooted in the generation of the flood. The main thing is they don't rule the Jewish people with rachamim. We are known for our rachamim. One of the traits of the Jewish people that identifies a person as belonging to the Jewish people is the ability to be the rachamim and not misplaced rachamim like Shaul had for being a god who was an Amaleki, but the proper rachamim when it's necessary on people. And if you're somebody who doesn't rachamim, it's very questionable. That's the first category of Erev Rav. I'm very fast. The feeling, the second category of Erev Rav, again skipping ahead. He gave examples of it by Yosef at that time as well, and he says, who are they? They fall spiritually. The angels themselves fell from Shemayim, and they went down to experience the world of man. In this case, these are already people, but they're falling spiritually. Why? Because they want to be more involved in promiscuous behavior, like at the golden calf at the Mount Sinai. That's their whole thing, znus, right? It says, so therefore, Kosh Baruch Hu takes them away from the world to come. So they become so involved in this world. I mean, it's been pointed out several times, countless times, how Hollywood was founded for the most part by a lot of Jews and have been involved a lot of the pushing of the envelope in terms of modesty in films and books, and there have been a lot of Jews, like really as if going the other direction where we're supposed to be. The Gemara says without Torah, the Jewish people become the most chutzpahdik nation in the whole world. In terms of the nations of the world. We need Torah to bridle our strengths and abilities to use them in the proper way. Otherwise, we go the other direction, not just become mild, but we become, the other extreme, right? And when any Jews who basically turn their back on Torah specifically for the sake of being able to live more promiscuously, that will fall in the category of Nephilim, he says, in terms of the Erev Rav. The third category, Giborim, he says, the third category, right? Skipping ahead to towards the more modern day version. He says, further back, he says, their main thing is to become famous. They just want to become famous. They want to become really well known. They want to become like a star. Like they want to stand out. Not it's okay to stand out. It's okay to be admired by their people. But as the Mishnah says, kavod, honor, is for the person who runs away from it. Meaning that we don't do things for the sake of honor. We do things that are honorable, right? That's for sure. But we don't do things for the sake of honor. We don't try to build ourselves up by anything we do. We're here to serve Hashem. We're here to use our potential to make the most of our lives. The best feeling that we're supposed to have in this world is knowing that we have pleased God by what we've done, and that we feel more fulfilled because we used more of our potential and did more good, more godly things in creation. That's if the fact that people then want to honor you, that's their business, and it can't go to your head, and it can't change your attitude. And that's why most people who really are honorable, and just like they say, the best politicians don't go to politics. Likewise, the most honorable people are the ones who usually shy away and avoid honor altogether. And they don't even if they get it, it doesn't mean much to them because they know it's not where life is at. It's just a false pride and a false sense of joy. So anybody who decides that's their approach to life, they want to become more famous, they want to become, the talk of the town, so to speak. So that would put them in the category of Erev Rav that would be in the category of Gibori. Okay, Rephaim, the fourth category. Okay, who were they? Because the whole history here of them. Simon she'inam b'nei Yisrael, Masurim nafshem al tzoras etzibor, v'od shehem ozvim es atar v'es elu ha'oskim ba she'inam tamchimchim. So he says this Rafim, you have to know the history behind them, but again, running out of time. He basically says that anytime you have Jews who forsake the Torah world, they could help out. They have the means to do so, either technically speaking, politically speaking, but they can make the lives of Torah scholars better, so they can do the mitzvah of learning and keeping the Masorah. Because that's really the main point of learning Torah, is to keep the Masorah alive. To be the next link in the tradition that knows the truth about God in this world. And it's not an easy life. Clearly, they're just like school teachers. I hear they have great pensions, but school teachers, they're most important people in secular society, paid the least, because that's not where it's at. People are interested in personal benefits and pleasures, and they don't really connect to how education does that for them, even though it's their own children and themselves. But the same thing in the Torah world. The Rabbanim, the teachers, the cheder teachers and the yeshivas, they don't make that much, and they have families, and often large families. And they need help. They need support. And the Zohar says that when the angel of Esav grabbed the leg of Yaakov, and the legs represent the Tomchei Torah, the supports, because the body of Yaakov was Torah itself. So the legs of Yaakov represent the supporters of Torah. And it says before Mashiach comes that it will be harder to raise money for Torah organizations and institutions, because the Sitra Achra, the Sar of Esav himself, will pull that money away. Not that it'll disappear necessarily, but it'll be pulled away, and people will become, they won't want to support the same. Like they should be working part time. They should have a job. They should be doing anything. Why are they living coal and living off other people's money? Parasites, things like No. You have to be very careful, because this one particular category, a lot of people think they're doing a favor to the Torah world by trying to push them into becoming more financially self-sufficient, and really, in fact, they might find themselves in the category of Erev Rav of the Rephaim. Because if you're in a position, to be sure that the kollel, that the people you're giving to, the people you're supporting, are authentic, they're not just hanging out and avoiding responsibility, they only belong there. But if you found a place where people are really learning well and for the right reasons, it is your opportunity to support them. It's your mitzvah, it's such an important thing, because you are fighting Esav, and the Sar Shel Esav at the end of days when it counts the most. And the last category he brings down is the Anakim, right? The Anakim, and he says over here that towards the end of it, sorry, 1 second. It's a lot of text here to go through. He basically says that they return the world to Tovahu, but he mentions how that these are people who, for example, who might want to build a shul or write a sefer Torah again for the covet of it. But he says primarily the fisha hema zalzlim and vazim b'tamei chachamim lomdid Torah. Okay, it's not in this case. Last one was that they could support. They don't. They're not necessarily mevazim. Not that they disgrace. The Gemara says one of the simanim that mashiach is imminent is that tamei chachamim will be despised, and they'll truth will be hated, and that's clearly something today that's very common. But this last category is it doesn't have to be that the person is financially positioned to support and doesn't. It could be that they don't have the money, but they don't show the respect either. They're mevazeh, they disgrace Torah and Talmid Chachamim. And believe it or not, as a person, that's not me. I would never do a thing like that. I learned Torah. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I have been in shuls. I have been in Bati Midrash. I've heard conversations where yeshiva bochim, people who learn all day long, I was shocked, but how they referred to Rabbanim, how they referred to Talmidim, or Talmid Chachamim, and some of it came from gaiva, some of it comes from security, that they look at themselves a little bit too much a higher level than they actually are, but they refer to is in a sense a lack of respect. From their perspective, they're just, talking about a chaver, talking about a rav, a gadol even. I mean, one person, teeth almost dropped out, that he referred to a gadol only by his last name. Like, didn't say rav so-and-so, didn't say, he referred to by his last name. And it's like, you're learning in yeshiva, how can you do that? And of course, you have, wars that go on sometimes within yeshivas, between groups, and like that. And the other gadol, the other rav is dirt in your eyes versus dirt in his eyes. Very, very careful. If gedolim argue amongst one another, big rabbis argue amongst one another, it's one thing, because they're supposed to have enough Yirah Shamayim and insight to know, when where the limits are, and when it becomes a chil Hashem. People have made mistakes. It's been recorded later on in history, but nonetheless, they're talmidim, the people below them, who are not nearly on the same level, with the same self-control, the same understanding, the same Yirah Shamayim, and they talk about the other people's, Torah leaders in such a way. You have to be careful. You don't think you're Erev Rav, you can certainly fall into the category of Erev Rav. So, this is just a brief overview, a very, very important and central topic, and major topic, and we're all funny. But the main, if I had to leave off at this point with one main point, the idea is that humility is the cure-all for everything. The Torah says that Moshe Benu was the humblest person to have walked the face of the earth. Is that just a compliment, or is that telling us why he was Moshe Benu, how he could become Moshe Benu? Ultimately speaking, and I just saw this evening in another sefer, how basically that when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he lowered the worlds and defiled them. And because they were defiled, the light of God could not directly come into the world anymore, because it wouldn't work. It doesn't work. So as a result of that, he works through angels and intermediaries, and that makes it very, very murky. Divine providence and all that. The same thing is true. If a person has gaiva, the Kli Yakar shows all through Parshas Tetzaveh, Parshas Truma, all the implements that were made for the Mishkan, which came in response to the golden calf, which came in response to the Erev Rav, right? All the implements that were made in the Mishkan to fix the problem were all based upon the concept of avanava, of anivus, of humility. And that's the key. That's the key. Humility is the cure-all for everything. If a person works on their humility, as opposed to just trying to have it, but they work on it, and the only way to work on it is to understand more and more each day how everything you have is a gift, and everything comes from Hashem. That as much as it looks like we're responsible for our success, we are not at all. And the more a person becomes a shalich of Hashem, realizes that the most meaningful thing they can do in this world is to be a messenger on behalf of Hashem, to have, here I am, Hashem, use me as you see fit to do your will, and become real with that, no matter what they're doing or where they're going, how they're doing things, they'll be protected for a number of reasons. they become a conduit for the light of Hashem, and there's no better way to go to war against the Erev Rav than that. Have a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Winston. I'm sort of in the dark right now. Maybe you can see some buildings in the background. If you guessed Netanya, that's where I am. I'm on a balcony now. Thank you, Rabbi. I hope that we carry on with another very exciting topic next week. Maybe we'll discuss Ein Od Milvado, or if anybody has any suggestions for the Rabbi, please contact him at 36.org or write in the comments here, or contact us at Israel Torah Facebook page or the Miriam Project Facebook page. Thank you, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.